Hey, Fit Squad. So, you got through your first pop quiz. As a reminder, it's not going into the grade book, so don't worry. But the lesson to be learned from this, besides a reminder that we are responsible and accountable for our own learning, is that you can't wait until you know you have a test to be reviewing information. And the reason that I chose the memory section to perform this little pop quiz is because this was the lesson that taught us about how to encode things into our long-term memory. So, as we talked about in class, no one got every single answer correct, including the extra credit question. We definitely had a classmate who came very close, which is awesome. But we're going to go through this. So, the first question was, which of the following encoding strategies would be the most useful in enhancing long-term memory? We had rote rehearsal alone, self-referencing alone, chunking and rote rehearsal, or self-referencing and mnemonic devices. The answer here was self-referencing and mnemonic devices. The majority of you put down something with rote rehearsal. And the reason that's not true is rote rehearsal is something that you use for a very short term. You get a code on your phone that you need to put in, and maybe you go 3457, 3457, 3457 until you can put it into the computer or wherever you need to put that code. But if I were to ask you for that code in a couple hours, let alone a week, you're not going to remember. Rote rehearsal is something that helps you use it while it's in your short term, your working memory, but it does not work for long term. So self-referencing and mnemonic devices would be the two there. And let's talk about those a little bit more. So an example of using rote rehearsal, I just gave an example of repeating the code over and over until you can plug it in. And again, the big reminder there is that whenever you use rote rehearsal, it's for the short term. Your parent or adult asks you to pick up milk from the store. Okay, milk. You buy the milk. But do you notice there's always that joke that people go to the store for milk? It's the one thing, and then it's the one thing they forget to get. Again, rote rehearsal is not good for encoding that into your memory. An example of using chunking. Chunking is breaking information up into categories. So, for example, if you are at the grocery store and you need to buy blueberries, bananas, apples, milk, eggs, turkey, flour, and honey. That's a really long list. You're not going to be able to just repeat that over and over again. But if you broke it up into, for example, fruit, animal products, grains, or fruit, baking supplies, meat, whatever, you're more likely to remember it. So chunking is all about breaking information up into similar categories so that you can remember that category and run through that category. Mnemonic devices. This one actually the majority of you got. This is a way to remind yourself by engaging some of your other senses as well, right? So it could be something like many of you used an acronym like Roy G. Biv to remember the colors of the rainbow, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS for mathematical equations. So acronyms are a great way to use a mnemonic device. Absolutely. It could also be creating a story in your mind. For example, bringing back the bananas and blueberries and apples. You imagine a large banana wearing an apple on her head and juggling blueberries, which was one of the examples that was given there, right? Or you could imagine a turkey rolling around in flour, and drinking a glass of milk. Using your senses to remember something. Self-referencing. This is another one where people had a hard time. Self-referencing is putting yourself in the material. So some of the examples that your classmates gave were things like if you were talking about the Revolutionary War and imagining yourself as the general, using yourself as a key figure in the knowledge that you're trying to learn makes us more likely to remember. And finally, as far as the examples go, this one I think is arguably one of the most important, and it's one of the big takeaways I want you to get from this year. Spacing, also known as spaced repetition. This is absolutely key. All of those other tools for how to remember things are great, but you should always be combining them with spaced repetition. And that means rather than trying to sit down and study for 2-3 hours on something the night before a test, nope, that's more likely you're kind of doing a little bit like rote rehearsal. No, spaced repetition means breaking it up and putting time in between your study sessions. So when you're using flashcards, 20 minutes on flashcards, take a break, walk away, come back, 20 minutes on flashcards, take a break, try it again the next day, or try it again the day afterwards. So either every day or every other day. And again, you'll see that the more you're doing it, you'll realize which ones you don't know, but you are way more likely to keep that in your brain for longer periods. And a big reason that we know about spaced repetition is because of that German scientist Ebbinghaus, who did research on this to show the deterioration in memory. And remember, with no prompting, our memory kind of goes and then levels out. If you remember it after the first couple days, you're likely going to keep remembering it. But that's with no intervention. If our memory is immediately going, and then we introduce spaced repetition, we remember it again, we're losing less. Spaced repetition is key, and that's part of the reason in your Power School checks, I ask that you include your timeline, and I give examples of how you can show the length of time you're using every day or every other day to review this material. And to remind you from before, that is not just material that you know you're being tested on. This should constantly be a way for you to review this. One way we ask you to do that is by taking Cornell notes in class so that after class, you can write down your big takeaway and then review that night really easily. Question 7 was a little bit sassy. And it was because it's our number one learning community guideline or expectation or agreement. We are responsible or we are accountable for our own learning. It is not your teacher's responsibility to tell you that you're going to be assessed on this information. They have told you by teaching you. None of your teachers are teaching you things willy-nilly. Whenever you are given information, it is because it's something that's going to be important. So it is your responsibility as an independent learner to do what you need to do to not only learn this information, but encode it into your memory for the long term. And the last was an extra credit. Difference between explicit and implicit. Explicit is like facts or formulas or details that you learn. Implicit are things that you can't necessarily explain. So for example, an explicit memory is maybe the Pythagorean theorem. You could explain that. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, right? An implicit memory could be something like how to breathe or how to ride a bike. You can't necessarily, and this is the example, right? You can't necessarily tell me how much pressure you put on the pedals or how you maintain your core balance, right? But it's something that you still have in your memory. So that's the difference between those two. Okay, I really hope that that kind of helps give you a reminder. But I want you to start using some of these tools in these Power School checks going forward. Use these tools because now you know what is going to help you keep it in your memory. So how can we use those going forward? All right, as always, let's meet. Sign up for an academic skills coaching session and we can go over this in more detail. Otherwise, review this in your own time. You're responsible for knowing it. All right. Go fit. Go Tigers. See you soon.